Mā tā mua ko te kupu, ko te whakaaro, ko te pito mata o te wānanga. Nau mai rā ki te pito mata e huake nei ki tēnei pai kōrero. Welcome to Mata with me, Mihingarangi Forbes, brought to you by Te Māngai Pāho and the Public Interest Journalism Fund. Soon we'll talk to Dr. Lara Greaves and Ngarimu Blair about white cis men, political lobbyists, and Jacinda Ardern's legacy. Engari, hei kōrero whakarara. Late last year, national candidate Tama Potaka won the Hamilton West by-election, taking the seat back from Labour in a decisive victory. Tama was the CE of Ngaitai ki Tāmaki. He's been a senior advisor to the New Zealand Super Fund, a general manager at Tainui Group Holdings, and holds a Master of Law from New York's Columbia University. After years of criticism for its lack of diversity, Tama's election brings some much-needed brown brains to the Blue Brigade. Kāti hei whakatakatoa I ana whainga me ōna whakaaro, ko hono mai a Tama Potaka I te whanganui ātara. Tēnā koe e hoa.
Tēnā koe te mārei kura kōrua tahi ko o hoa tautoko, e mihi ana ki a koe te tuaka Ngarimu, ki a koe anō hoki Lara.
Ka pai. You've been in Parliament now for a couple of months. What are your takeaways?
Well, it's a great place to get lost in and then find yourself out of. So getting my feet under the table and getting visible in Parliament and making sure the security know who I am is a really important factor. But also being visible on the ground in Hamilton West and being active, engaging with our constituents is the number one kaupapa that I'm committed to right now.
You're also the spokesperson, or you have the Māori Development portfolio for National. What do you see as the main impediments for Māori development, and what are some of your solutions?
Well, one of the biggest challenges that we have with Māori development right now is the cost of living and the economic situation that's been very challenging for our whānau. And in my view, and certainly what I hear from Māori constituents, both in Hamilton West and Māori up and down the country, is that the cost of living and the economy is very challenging for the majority of whānau Māori. So it's something that really challenges whānau, and it's something that we're committed to addressing as we try to win the election in October.
Yeah, I guess, when you talk about success or getting ahead, you have to have, it's through opportunity. And so when I look at your own whenua at Mōkai Pātia near Taihape, it's said to be about 90% landlocked, and as owners, many of the generations have never stood on the whenua there. So after 90 years of, basically land alienation, how would you help shore up the access and the opportunity for your people to access and use their land?
Well, 75% of the land at Mōkai Pātia is legally restricted and it's legally landlocked, so there's no legal access. It's quite a challenging matter for the whānau and the iwi at Mōkai Pātia, but something that's going through the treaty settlement negotiation process right now. So we hope and aspire to have some solutions through that process. But those solutions also have to work with and connect with the landowners, whether or not they're the Crown, for example, Department of Conservation with New Zealand Defence Force, or private landowners for some of the big stations like Ngāmatia and Māngai that are owned by, some of which are actually owned by our relatives. So it's a whole of community, iwi, Crown, Council engagement that has to take place.
Yeah, in your maiden speech, you talked about those rural areas being the backbone or the feeders, if you like, into the big cities. But when you can't access your land, what are some of the solutions there for Māori businesses and iwi and land blocks to get ahead?
Well, in one of the instances, it's actually the Department of Conservation, the Director General, giving us access by enabling us to be invitees through Dockland to access our own land. So that's a great example where you actually don't have to go through a treaty settlement process, but it's the Director General of DOC activating that provision or that responsibility and mandate that she has. In other instances, it's working with landowners, perhaps through easements or some sort of licensing arrangement, some of which informally happen on the ground now. But when you start talking about roads or infrastructure that are 20 kilometres long, that's quite a big challenge. And certainly there are existing pathways to achieve that. But for us, there are some there are some avenues that exist right now that we can use to access those lands, and we need to do more to have better access and more reasonable access.
You're the MP for Hamilton West, and in the past
and a great place it is too.
And a great place. And in the past, you've said, you don't really want to talk about co-governance, but when you consider that the Waikato River runs through your electorate, it's hard not to. It was the national government that created the framework for the Waikato River Authority, which is a co-governance arrangement. The next iteration, if you like, is Three Waters, yet your party's opposed. So what's the alternative to the iwi in your electorate?
Well, the first thing is that when I talk with most of the Māori constituents, both in my electorate and throughout the country, people actually aren't really concerned or focused on co-governance. What they're focused on is the cost of living and some of the, particularly in Hamilton West, some of the pretty dangerous and difficult law and order issues that we have with retail and crime. So that's actually, co-governance is not a massive issue, not really discussed. In terms of the treaty settlement processes which the National Party has undertaken, we respect the partnership arrangements that exist, particularly with the Waikato River Authority. Absolutely acknowledge that and also recognise that in terms of treaty settlements, National has been the most progressive of all parties to get those jobs and those settlements done. So that's where we get to with treaty settlements. We respect what's in place.
So what's the alternative then? What's the alternative to Three Waters?
The alternative that we've said is that. Are you saying the alternative to co-governance?
No, to Three Waters, and that's an issue that the national government has not been on board with.
I think at the outset we all recognise there are issues with the Three Waters, wastewater, stormwater and freshwater, but having Molesworth Street or Murphy Street saying we know best and we're going to centralise control of all this is not what we support. We actually support more community council-oriented solutions, and councils can determine for themselves how to organise themselves and get to solutions for the waters in their own area.
But why wouldn't it be Māori orientated when the awa is their tupuna awa? Shouldn't they have a say over their own awa?
Yeah, and that's for the communities and the councils and those iwis to get together, and to decide their own
That's not really worked this
process
far.
Or
it's
their
not really
own,
worked this
or their
far
own
having
solution.
It's not
for someone in the beehive to say to people in Rata or Mokai Pātea, we know everything and here's your answer.
Yeah, like I said, it's not really worked in the past for Māori to have community hui with community.
It's definitely worked for the Waikato River Authority.
Yeah, but that was created. It was a framework that was created and legislated, so it had to happen. So what you're saying is you want Waikato to get around the table with the community and talk about their aspirations over the water.
No, we respect the Waikato River Authority as a solution for the Waikato River, and we support that. What we don't respect or agree with is Molesworth Street and the people in the government right now to say, we have a solution for everybody, and here it is, enforcing that and imposing that on all councils and communities. As you know, Mihingarangi, the Waikato River Authority is very well supported by councils and communities.
You say that the cost of living is what's important for Māori at the moment, but actually natural resources is all about cost of living. And if I reflect back to the late 90s or early 2000s when the national government privatised power, it hit New Zealanders in the pocket, and for some now it's still hitting them in the pocket because they're paying lines fees, and in the King Country it's terrible for people down there. So isn't the same thing to be said about water? So in the future, if Māori don't have a say about it, it's going to become a cost of living issue for them.
Oh, I think that there are definitely pathways, particularly in the experience that you've described in a number of other management arrangements and design arrangements that Māori are involved in up and down the river with rivers, up and down the country with rivers, where there is some engagement with iwi, with communities that have a high interest in water. So I think it's pretty rich for you to say that, the National Party did this 25 years ago and it's the National Party's fault that we've got a cost of living crisis now. Actually, there are a number of governments that have done a number of things, but right here, right now, the Labor government has spent an enormous amount of money on pet projects instead of focusing on the key thing, which right now is the cost of living for whānau.
Let's talk about one of those portfolios that come under the Māori Development is Māori Broadcasting. There was a merger on the table and Māori Broadcasting was going to be the second kind of wave of that, if you like. It didn't happen. So it's under your portfolio. Would you change anything?
I think that, I'm getting my feet under the table and understanding the full purview and the full implications of how monies are allocated and how people are allocated across the Māori broadcasting space right now, I'm not really in a position to conclude that, yes, that's the best thing, or are there other options? That's something that I'll turn to in the next couple of months.
You do know about iwi radio, though, because you've had a little bit to do with that in the past. And, you know, there's 21 iwi radio stations. Each station receives $500,000 a year to run. We all know that. That's been well and truly reported over decades and decades because it hasn't really changed. If we take those iwi radio stations during the cyclone, who were the lifeline to those communities when no one else was there, no one else was even on their way to their communities, would you support funding them to the same level as RNZ and TVNZ in terms of, in terms of their funding?
Oh, that's something I'd definitely be open to looking into. And I do know that and acknowledge your observation that Māori Radio, but not only Māori Radio, Marae and other Māori-oriented sources and mahi and people have been absolutely instrumental in the recovery effort and the response effort for both the floods and the cyclone. So that's definitely something I'm happy to look into.
Yeah, so going forward, when, you know, because climate change isn't going away, we're going to still have all of these cyclones and floods and the rest of it. Would that be something that under your portfolio you'd look at kind of bringing together some kind of Māori community hub using the broadcasting, the reo irirangi, you know, the marae, whānau oro, all those kinds of things? That would make sense. It's kind of what's happening in some of the communities.
Yeah, I think that's happening in some communities already. And I certainly know from my experience of people, particularly out at Tuhikaramea, Temple View and the Mormon community out there, that there is some real arcing or collaboration around making sure there's some resilience against major weather and other seismic events that happen. So that's something that I've looked at and thought, actually, there are some things within Māori management practices, let's call it, or Māori response practices that are really, really positive for Māori communities, but also for all of New Zealanders. So making sure that those really positive, constructive responses that are led by Māori communities or influenced by Māori communities are supported is right where my thinking is at.
It sounds a lot like co-governance there, which isn't about resource.
I don't know, because actually the definition of co-governance has never been plainly laid out. So I think that there's a lot of spectrum in how you describe that, Mihingarangi.
So you support that kind of scenario where you've got iwi and the iwi radio stations, the local Māori health working with council and government?
Well, I think that already happens in some places, and some of that is informal. It happens anyway. So up on the East Coast, for example, there was a great effort during the COVID response with iwi and marae and others working together. Ditto Waipareira out at West Auckland. Not that I go out there on a regular basis, you know, once a year, and that's probably enough. But you know, there are some great examples of people working together to deliver on need, and that happens organically. What I think you're suggesting to me is that actually we should have statutorily imposed co-governance over a whole range of things, and that's not something that the National Party believes in or supports.
Tēnā koe. Kia ora, e hoa. Kia pai tō rā.
Haere pai atu, o kia ora mai, ka kite anō.
Ai, ko Tama Potaka, tērā hoi anō, hei runanga i tērā uiuitanga me ngā take nui o te wā, e tahuri atu nei tātou ki te taumata toko huatau o mata. She's one of the very few Māori political commentators who is actually qualified to do it. E te Ihumania Victoria University political scientist, Dr. Lara Greaves, and he is currently the most famous Māori on TikTok. Ko tērā atu momo huatau te take. So we've invited him on for a few clicks.
I did wonder if my suit was up to it today.
Ngāti whātua ora kei style icon / mover shaker. Ngarimu Blair, tēnā koro. I told you I had an intro for you.
Yeah.
You snuck up.
Can I get an out of 10 for the suit?
Yeah. What did you make of Tama Potaka's kōrero?
Well, Tama is, you know, he's had a very impressive commercial corporate career, and he's clearly been brought up on the Pā, and in one of our most famous Māori schools, and the National Party are really lucky to have him, to be frank. You know, he's very articulate, intelligent, and yeah, I think they're really lucky to have him, and he will be a great representative in that spectrum of the politics for our Māori people.
Kia ora. What stuck out for you?
Yeah, I totally agree with that assessment. I think that he's coming closer to articulating a position on co-governance, and a position that does have that Māori flavour to it, that is actually not just, oh, us versus them, something a little bit more nuanced, a little bit more localism, a little bit more like local control over local things. And we could kind of see that coming through from the beginning in some of Chris Luxon's answers, the moment he actually got on TV, his first Q&A interview. But to have Tama kind of take that and run with it, and with his experience in mana, it kind of makes a bit more sense.
Yeah, the experience on the ground so he can actually see it.
Yeah.
Do you think the National Party is going to get into a little bit of you know, issues around co-governance if it can't define what exactly it is?
Well, I don't think either party can define exactly what it is. Is it 50% representation across every natural asset and resource, and the health sector, and road building and house building, and all sorts? So, yeah, no, I kind of agree with Tama to a certain extent that, most Māori in West Auckland, which he doesn't visit very much, we hear, where I live, no one's talking really about co-governance. Yeah. There are a lot of people trying to make it a pitched battle between and get on both sides of it, the rednecks and others who are trying to turn it into a race issue. But the average person, I think it's quite an abstract thing. Totally,
but as you know, it's important to be at the table.
It is, and it's how do you get to the table? It's for us as a Ngāti Whātua speaking here, we want to be at the table. But does that mean we have to be 50% of the table? Or do we want the people who are making decisions to be very aware of our issues in our area? So there's a lot to go under the bridge on this one.
I did ask Tama about what the alternative to Three Waters is. It doesn't seem to be like anyone can really articulate. Are both parties failing to kind of explain what they want?
I think both Labour and National are struggling a lot in that area. We saw National come up with their free waters policy not long ago, and a lot of the critiques on that were that it wasn't costed as such. And like one of the big issues here, taking it back to that cost of living issue, is that our rates bills will go up if something isn't fixed or something changes. So I think that's still probably an area that hopefully we'll see some policy development and discussion over the election period in that area.
Yeah. Well, there's kind of some big news today. You know, the Stuart Nash saga has raised some interesting insights into how ministers deal with lobbyists and big business. And while journalists struggle to even get an interview with a minister, we hear that they're taking phone calls from big business lobbyists. So I guess what's happening here, Lara?
Well, our lobbying industry, it seems, compared to all the international comparators, has not been as well regulated. And it's also actually, it's hard because you're kind of making excuses a bit when you say it's a tricky area to regulate, but it kind of is. Because then if you take a Māori lens on it, it's like, it's kind of also access to ministers. If you take an NGO or like charity lens on it, they have access to ministers as well, so that gets a bit tricky. Yes. But the big concern here are those third-party lobbyists and those people that did have swipe card access to the buildings. They could just go through and hang out.
Ngarimu have one? Do you have a swipe card access to Parliament?
I only recently got a swipe card to Auckland Council, and this is our whenua. So, yeah,
it's a good point though. But like, how do Māori get in front of ministers? You know, in things like RMA, water, like really important stuff.
Really easily in an election, yeah. But generally, our Māori MPs are pretty open, and we see them at different events, and they're pretty good with their access. Doesn't mean you get what you want every time. Far from it. But yeah, like most Kiwis, be very concerned with those with very deep pockets being able to influence decisions. But yeah, as iwi and as Māori, it is a bit different. It's more like diplomacy because we regard ourselves as being the treaty partner, talking to our treaty partner, and that's how. So we don't see that as lobbying.
Yeah, but do you still get to have audiences sometimes with those that aren't Māori ministers?
Oh yeah, no doubt we do. But we're in Auckland iwi. We're a long way from Wellington. We don't really engage in that a lot. So
the PM's saying that he wants to see a code of conduct. He wants to get rid of the swipe cards. Is that enough?
I was quite surprised that they were going to do anything because I thought it would just blow over a few days and then it's another issue, it's white cis men or whatever the issue of the day. But so I was quite surprised that there was an announcement. That's not what I was expecting from that press conference. And so it's just kind of the dipping the toe in the water.
Bad.
Just that, probably surprise good because it's something that I think most people in society can get behind. It's lightly populist, so it's lightly going on that us versus them, the regular person versus the elites. It's lightly tapping into that, but not too intensely. So he's kind of just kicking it off and saying, figure out a plan to the lobbyists or we'll regulate you more and have a bit of a review. And what's been interesting about it is sort of National and others coming out saying that it maybe should be more hardcore than that. So he's it's an interesting political position to be in where I think maybe we will get some more cross-party support for reform.
The former Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern is retiring from Parliament. How will she be, her political legacy for Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei, how will that be remembered?
She'll be fondly remembered for the way she engaged empathetically with the nation, with our people, her representing, young wahine, who, and having a little peppy and going through, the stress of that, being a young mum. So she'll be fondly remembered by us. And we had the honour of hosting her when she was given the korowai, and we were very proud to host her. So yeah, she'll be fondly remembered.
How will you remember her?
Yeah, I was pregnant myself at the same time as her, and I just remember throwing up in the McDonald's car park and seeing that great fish hook announcement around her pregnancy. And I think that's deeply meaningful to a lot of parents, a lot of people trying to juggle a lot of things. I think more in that political science society thing, in the years to come we will be reflecting on her as the COVID Prime Minister, the crisis Prime Minister. And that's just different from being a day-to-day delivery Prime Minister. I think a lot of people have been reflecting on her limitations, and it's kind of hard when they've just left.
What do you think she'd still be there if not for COVID?
That's a really hard question, actually. Potentially, it's weird because, technically in 2017, National had the highest share of the vote, so she was on the back foot from day one.
Yeah. Well, there was a wahine Māori, Greens co-leader that is, Marama Davidson, she came under fire in the last week or so. She didn't, sorry, I'm reading the wrong notes. She made a comment about cis white men. Do you think it was wrong?
Well, I think that the bar for wahine Māori in public discourse is getting hit by a motorcycle and then your comments after that are judged. If I had been hit by a motorcycle, I would really hope that someone just kind of gave me a bit of leeway, because I say dumb
Send
stuff generally. I know, I'm not a minister, but it's that thing of it wasn't put well, and unfortunately it's blown up, and it's blown up for reasons based on research. Basically, that group, cis white men, are particularly sensitive to sort of freedom of speech concerns, are getting more polarised over time, i.e. disliking other parties over time. We can see that in the political psychology research. So I wasn't surprised that blew up.
Did you know what a cis white man was?
Well, apparently I'm half cis white and half Māori, cis Māori, so I was evenly balanced
with
here.
your cis.
But Marama is a fierce advocate for te tino rangatiratanga, mana motu hake, and te taiao and kaitiakitanga. So she's always, puts her front foot forward on issues, and she's a fierce fighter for our environment and Māori rights. So.
Do you think she should have been more careful about what she says, or were you okay with it?
Oh, some people make mistakes, and given her track record on all the other issues, people should be forgiven.
Is there equity of free speech in Aotearoa?
No. No, there's just a flat no. I think that most of us are quite sensitive to it because, I just said in the inboxes of my colleagues, if I say something politically, I get, a series of emails or tweets or whatever, whereas my male colleagues get, "Dear fine sir, I respectfully disagree with you," whereas I get, "You're fat and I disagree with you, you're not objective." So it's quite clear that we face different consequences, different pushback, just based on our identities. That is quite fundamentally clear from all the evidence.
Aroha ki a koe te tuakana. This week we had New Zealander of the Year, Rangi Mātāmua. What did you make of him?
Oh, it's fantastic. I mean, that morning of Matariki, and really, New Zealanders embraced it. Kiwis of all backgrounds embraced it. And my little country rugby club, even, first time they asked if I could do a mihi and a karakia at the aftermatch function. All on the back of lots of movements, but that one really hit people. And I think it's that mix of indigeneity, South Pacificness, and the environment. And, and everyone loves looking at the stars.
That's true. He said that he had no idea, and I truly believe him. Yeah. And he said he just thought, the other candidates, he didn't have a shoe-in, but he did. What do you make of him?
Well, yeah, it's Matariki and Rangi Mātāmua and all the work that he's done. Obviously, he's just amazing and done an excellent job, and been a real trailblazer for Māori and astronomy and all of that area. So, wonderful, just absolutely wonderful.
What are we looking forward to this week in politics, in iwi, in council, in national, local? Anything coming up?
Well, we're post-matatini and we're just looking to lie low and take a breather.
Hang your nice suits up, brush them down.
Yeah, get them dry clean, ready for the next one.
Ready for the next TikTok. what views your TikTok, by the way, do you know?
I mean, I don't look, but
you're told.
One of my daughters has told me it's
What'd she say?
around 8 million.
8 million.
Apparently that's a lot.
Could you do a mata promo for us? Anything that you're looking forward to in the next week?
Yeah, just under Ardern's farewell, you know, and just really just her farewell, her valedictory speech, what she brings up and what was important to her and all of that, just really, farewelling her.
Ka pai. Well, tēnā kōrua, thank you for sharing all your views, and it'll be interesting to see how Tama Potaka goes and whether National gets in what kind of other portfolios. In fact, what do you think he would be good at, if not just Māori development? Anything else in there?
Well, we have a housing crisis generally, and Māori have an even bigger housing crisis. So with his recent property background and finance background, I think he could add a lot to help unlock that. You know, a warm, affordable, safe house is the foundation for so many things. So I'd really like to see him roll his sleeves up in that area.
Any other areas? He's
really, like anything. Like I have to hand it to anyone in Hapu Iwi Māori organisation politics, because that's like some very hardcore politics. If you can handle that, you can handle anything.
So Māori development, but you think he could work somewhere else? And
yeah, like I think anything economic, housing. He's got the associate
minister
housing,
of anything.
Minister. He could be minister for everything, like they have in Labour.
Yes. Well, number 12 on the party list for the Greens is Efeso Collins. How do you think he'll go? 12, you know.
Yeah, marginal, like
marginal,
maybe.
yeah.
And it's been an interesting one with him, because like, does he just need to stay in the Greens for a bit longer to get higher on that list? I would have maybe expected him to be further up that list, but the Greens are an interesting beast, generally.
Do you think he'll fit in with the Greens, Efeso?
The Greens base, I'm not sure. Maybe some other parts of the Greens. It was a surprise actually, but you know, he's a great social advocate and orator. So yeah, I think he'll do okay. He'll
be able to, you know, rebuild some of that campaigning drive that he got out in his areas, and maybe who knows?
Who knows?
Who knows? Ko wai ka mōhio. Well, tēnā kōrua, thank you for joining us. E huri o tātou mata ki ngā take o te wā, e tārai ana I te ara whakamua, kia kaua tātou e whakarerea ki muri, kia kaua hoki tātou e mata kohore. Ka nui te mihi ki te puna whakatonga rewa, me te Māngai Pāho. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. We'll be back in a fortnight. Nō horo mai.